Hello, everyone. So I came across this book series by a self-published author, named David A. Wells, called "The Sovereign of the Seven Isles," and I listened to this series on audiobook, which is where I do most of my reading. We're going to take this series one book at a time, and then I'll tell you my thoughts on the series as a whole later on. But the first book is Thinblade. And Thinblade is really interesting in how traditional it is. It's very traditional fantasy. It doesn't try to do a lot of things that are kind of common to modern fantasy, right? It's not trying to be really dark. It's not trying to be really edgy. It's not trying to flip tropes on their head. And it's very, in that sense, it's very comfortable for a lot of fantasy readers, I think, because it's so traditional. You have a chosen one, you have a prophecy, you have a dark lord, you have adventuring, questing, essentially. Everything you would expect in traditional fantasy is right there. And I think that's nice. I think it's comfortable sometimes to take a step back from all the, oh, we're doing this, and we're going to turn this on its head, and we're going to turn that on its head, and we're going to, and get into a book that's like, you know what? This is a fantasy book, and I'm going to write it like a fantasy book, and it's going to be a traditional fantasy, and that's what it is. And it doesn't apologize for it at any point in the series, and certainly not in the first book, Thinblade. David A. Wells is a self-published author. He has Sovereign of the Seven Isles. He has the Dragonfall series, and he has a sci-fi series now that he's working on. As far as quality of authorship goes, pretty decent. You know, I wouldn't put his pen or his craftsmanship up there with Brandon Sanderson or George R. R. Martin, but certainly above a lot of what's out there in the self-publishing market. This series is pretty unknown. I haven't heard anybody talk about it. When I've gone out and talked online to people about it, they've never heard of it, and it's been around since 2011. So I think a lot of that's just because there's so many self-published books out there, and it's so hard to market self-published books just because of everything that's out there. But it's not a bad series, and Thinblade itself is a fun read. It's fast-paced. It moves from point to point steadily and quickly. It has those pauses, those character moments that fantasy is really known for, but it really moves because the book starts out where the chosen one isn't the chosen one, right? He is the second son of a noble family. And in the very beginning of the book, his brother gets killed and he becomes the heir. And then the whole chosen one prophecy starts. So it all falls on him when it was supposed to actually fall on his brother. And there's a whole bunch of stuff around that because he actually doesn't even really know about it, and he has to learn all of it on the run, literally. But I do recommend this book. I really do. If you want to read a traditional fantasy that is not trying to do a bunch of different things, that's not trying to show you how different it is, or trying to be super dark, trying to be the next George R. R. Martin, and is complete, the series is done, I recommend Thinblade, and then kind of go from there. When I finished Thinblade, I was very surprised that this book wasn't more well known, and it's really overlooked. And I think for that, you should also go out and read it because it's different. It's from an author that you probably have not read, and it's always good to get those authors in, right? So here we have the cover. There's actually three covers. There's also this one, and then there's this one, which is the audiobook cover. So this is a cover I was familiar with. I don't really like either cover, to be honest with you. I like where the first cover is going, in the sense that it has the character on the cover, but it doesn't really draw you in, and neither does this one. It's just a castle on a hill, and they're both kind of like, well, if you've read the book, they have some significance to you, but if you're new to the book, if you haven't read it, it really doesn't do anything to draw you in. And I think that's part of the problem. So in the book, and I'm gonna try not to spoil everything, but I'm gonna have to talk about some of the stuff. Alexander Valentine, who is the main character, he is part of this minor noble family on one of these 7 islands, and each island is a kingdom. He is second son. He has an older brother. He has a sister, and he has a tutor named Lucky, who is you find out later is like a minor wizard. But he kind of is a potions guy, and then he has his parents, of course. Both of them are also wizards. The book starts with his brother being assassinated, and from there it immediately goes to he captures the assassin. They take the assassin back to the estate. They interrogate the assassin, and then as that's happening, before he really even knows what's going on, there's this magical pulse that hits the entire world at the same time, and it's a warning that the Dark Lord who had frozen himself in time is back, and it marks Alexander Valentine because he is the chosen one. And very quickly his parents are like, oh, you're you now have the weight of this prophecy on you, and we need to get you ready and we need to get you going. And even as they're doing that, as he's getting stuff ready to go, they get attacked by what is effectively a demon. The last he sees of his parents is while he's fleeing with his sister and with Lucky, their estate's burning to the ground. So immediately he loses everything he's familiar with, and he's on the run. And they're being chased by demon dogs, and he barely knows what's going on. And Lucky kind of try to fill him in as much as he can on the way. And it's like, hey, look, you're supposed to be the person who unites the 7 Isles against this guy and kills him. And if you fail, the world's gonna fall into like thousands of years of darkness and evil. For a traditional setup, right? So from the beginning, he's lost everything and he's on the run. And then for most of the book, he's on the run. You're not turning around and fighting. He's not like immediately powerful. He's barely knows what's going on, and he's running and from things he doesn't understand. And eventually he comes across a group of eventually he comes across these people that help him out and take him to this valley he's supposed to go to. And I'm leaving a lot of names out and stuff because I don't want to get into a whole lot of spoilers or anything. And there's a love interest involved. And once they're there, that's when you get the first big slowdown, and he finds out he needs to find this famous magical sword called the Thinblade that will help him become king of Ruatha. And then once he's king of Ruatha, of course, he'll have a base from which to unify the 7 Isles and do what he needs to do. So Alexander as a protagonist is a pretty decent character. He's likable, he's interesting, but his support characters really struggle. Lucky's fine. Lucky stands out. He's different. He's an older guy. He's kind of wise. He does this low-level magic with potions and stuff. His sister Abigail is kind of your traditional female fantasy character who is capable of fighting, right? She's good with a bow, and that's kind of it. It's not a ton of personality to her in this book. And the love interest is kind of the same way. You get it's another female character who can fight in fantasy, and that's pretty much the archetype. And the love interest thing is kind of forced. It's just done, and there's no real build up or anything. It's almost like a love at first sight situation for both of them. Both of those characters get more interesting later on in other books, but in Thinblade, they're pretty basic. The journey that Alexander is on is pretty good. It's the fun part of the book. It's fast. It's like, how are they going to get away from this? How are they going to get away from this? Now they're being chased by this guy. How are they going to get away from that? It gets worse and worse and worse until he finds this valley, and then he's got to deal with politics instead of fighting, and then he's got to go again on the run to get this blade. It's hard to gauge some of the stuff that I normally review in these books because a lot of it doesn't come out in Thinblade. So like the world building in Thinblade is fine. It's not super in depth, but it's a first book. So, of course, you're going to get introduced to most of the world building later on. And what you are introduced to is fine. There's no significant flaws with it. A little bit different in the fact that there's these 7 islands, and those islands are all kingdoms. And that the Dark Lord had frozen himself in time, and then he's back, rather than having been destroyed previously and coming back, which is what usually seems to happen. As far as the quest goes, it's all very traditional. It's, if you're not looking for traditional fantasy, this is not your book. But if you are, it's comfortable to read, but it's not super in depth. So in Thinblade specifically, because like I said, you get introduced to a lot of this later on. So you've got the island he's on, Ruatha, and it was a kingdom unified under a noble line, and then the last of the noble line disappeared along with the Thinblade, and it's just kind of been going along ever since. um like, it's fine, but it's not unified very well because there's no one to really unify around, and it just sort of keeps going, which I guess could happen if nobody really hates each other, which they don't in Ruatha, so it kind of works out. And politically, it's a little convenient in that it's all nicely set up for if somebody returns with a Thinblade, everybody's going to go, oh, that's the king, because only the king can wield the Thinblade, and, there's nobody to really rule or to overthrow, so it's just kind of step in. That's not especially realistic, but it works for the book. It's fine. The magic system is fine. You don't learn a ton about it in Thinblade, so I'm not going to dive too deep into it. But it's your fairly traditional magic system. Some mages focus on fireball, some mages focus on wind, some mages focus on, what have you. You have Lucky, who is sort of like a crafter mage. He makes these potions that come into play pretty significantly throughout Thinblade, especially, but also come into play later on. And of course, Alexander Valentine will have to become a wizard as well. So there's a lot of travel in the book, but it's not like Tolkien's travel where it kind of meanders from time to time. It's very direct. We need to go here, and we need to go here, and we need to go here, and we need to go here. In that sense, straight lines. So you don't get a huge sense of the world around you, but you are also focused on the chase and getting away from the enemies and getting to where they need to go. So it works because there's tension and excitement. It's just, if you're looking for that deeper exploration of the world around you, that happens in later books. It does not happen in Thinblade. David A. Wells is a competent writer. He writes well enough. The prose is fine, but you're not going to read this and go, oh my gosh, this prose is incredible. And you're not going to read it and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's so terrible. It's fine. And that's kind of the book for me. It's fine. It's a nice read, and then it's fun. It's comfortable if you're looking for that like a dip back into the traditional fantasy, but it doesn't stand out, and it doesn't stand above its peers, and it doesn't certainly doesn't stand above a Tolkien or a Martin. But not everybody has to, right? Not everybody's Brandon Sanderson, not everybody's Tolkien, not everybody's George R. R. Martin. If I had to put him in one of those 3, he's more of a Brandon Sanderson than anything. Kind of similar with prose too. It's very functional prose like Sanders. I was going to give this Thinblade a major criticism, and this is something that happens in every book. He can be repetitive. in that he'll explain how something works, and then he'll re-explain how something works, and then he'll re-explain how it works. This happens more than it should. That and the characters not really being stand out and developed in Thinblade are my two biggest criticisms of it, because this is actually one of my favorite books out of the series, and was an easy, like, hey, I'm going to pick up the next book for me, because it was fun. It wasn't world-shatteringly new or interesting in that way, but it was fun. And you'll like Alexander Valentine, you'll like Lucky. The other characters, they're fine. It's not a perfect book, and it's a hard book to rate, because I'm like, it did a lot of things I like. It's a traditional fantasy. It doesn't try to rewrite the rules of the game. Not that I avoid those things, but sometimes I'm looking for something that doesn't do those things, right? Uh, it's familiar in a Tolkien-esque sense in a lot of ways, and it's not super brutal, but it doesn't shy away from blood. It's just not wallowing in it. It's not flawless, but it's fun. So, like I said, it's hard to rank. I'd put it at maybe a 5 out of 10, I think. 10 being Tolkien, right? Especially in this kind of book. Then being Tolkien. 1 being unreadable. It's fine. It's fun. It's enjoyable. And when you finish it, you will probably want to read the second book. And there's nothing wrong with that. Not every book has to shatter the world and upend your understanding of the fantasy genre. The ideal audience for this book is really people looking for a good time, and people looking to dive back into traditional fantasy a little bit and get away from all the try hard. I've got to overturn every trope. I've got to be as dark as Martin. No, I've got to be darker than Martin. There's a lot of that out there, and it's also a nice step away from Romantasy, which is flooding the market like crazy and driving a lot of people insane because they don't want to read it. And if you're like me and you go looking for audiobooks, you have a really hard time getting away from Romantasy, because they've put it in the rest of the same genre as fantasy, so it's just like everywhere, and you have to read descriptions to figure out that it's Romantasy, instead of just being able to be like, oh no, this is Romantasy because it's in its own genre, which it should be. If you want traditional fantasy, you want to step away from all that, and you want something that's light and fun, go read Thinblade. You'll enjoy it. And I'll see you guys next time. If you liked the video, please hit the like button, hit subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell for notifications.